Actually, what brought me here was a very long chain of events that start in 2009, when I first discovered that I had been exposed to large amounts of uranium and strontium. That was discovered through an elemental hair test in July of 2009. So after that point, I decided to start studying closely U.S. federal policy to, try to learn about the U.S. government, because I figured that would have been the most likely source of my exposure. These elements don't exist in nature at sufficient levels, or even at all, to suggest that I would be naturally exposed to that type of level of radioactivity. Now, everybody has some radioactivity in their bodies based on the fact that there's been tons of atmospheric testing, ever since the devices were first developed. But that being said, my exposure is about 80 times higher than what you would expect to see. So one of the things that I ended up studying was the nuclear industry as part of learning all this policy. And I posted a piece online in 2011 where I evaluate the industry and determined that the U.S. federal government's actually giving to the nuclear industry about $2.5 billion a month in subsidies. This comes in the form of cleanup activities, securement, research, paying out settlements when people were injured, like active duty soldiers that were exposed to radiation, things like that. So I was really surprised to learn this, so I started studying the U.S. government further, and by this point I had written my first book about U.S. federal policy. That book, I believe, got me labeled as a dissident, and so from that point life has become increasingly more difficult. The observations that I have would be consistent with the types of tactics that were in use under J. Edgar Hoover's time at the FBI in terms of the slander or intimidation of former contacts and so forth. So, but going back to 2012, I documented a former employee of my business having stolen a felony amount of my materials. He committed felony theft, embezzlement, mail fraud, invasion of privacy. He engaged in illegal business activities and participated in a conspiracy to commit trademark infringements against my company. So I documented these things. I submitted that evidence to the Spokane Police Department in February, I believe it was the 21st, 2012, and at that point I was denied equal protection under the law by an officer there. She failed to act on that information. She was legally required to submit that to the U.S. federal government. So as a result of that, the value of my products from my former company were horribly damaged. My supply line was demanding from me cash buy-downs on stuff that I had already sold and delivered to them, and threatening to pull my products. So my product was devalued below the cost of manufacture, and for the remainder of 2012, I worked essentially for free, selling everything that I owned to stay in business, and I was able to stay in business long enough, luckily, to renounce my U.S. citizenship first, and then 5 months later, I got sued by the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company in the Middle District of North Carolina. And so from that point, that's when America's intelligence community became actively involved in my life, it appears, for most of my former contacts were intimidated into not maintaining contact with me. So I came here to Washington, D.C. to basically make myself top dog, paint myself the target for the intelligence community, and show them what intelligence is about. I'm going to make them work, creating quality jobs in the public sector. I was a job creator in the private sector, and now I've come here to create jobs in the public sector. And I also educate people while I'm here in front of the White House, 5 hours a day, flipping the bird. So I try to teach people about federal policy and use of the legal system, and I'm knowledgeable in a variety of other disciplines that intersect with federal policy.